Hello and welcome to Clock Spinning, the podcast of Magic's history as told card by card. I'm Austin, and with me, as always, is my co-host Connor. How are you tonight, Connor?
I'm doing pretty well. You're bringing in a level of energy that I'm not sure I can match tonight.
Are you tired?
I'm a little tired.
The decaf coffee isn't doing it tonight?
It's not doing much for me.
I'm not tired, but I am sort of zombie-like because we are in the midst of, and this also is part of the reason for the delay between episodes. We are in the midst of soccer mayhem, international soccer mayhem, with both UEFA Euros and Copa America. So I'm basically mainlining television right now like a total degenerate. So I think I may just be excited to do something besides stare at. I guess I'm still staring at a screen. But
It's a different screen.
Also, if you want my thoughts on Copa, just let me know, Connor. I'm ready.
That'll be the other show.
That'll be the other show. All right. First, I'll have to get you into soccer.
Yep.
Anyway, we are here today to talk about something as iconic as Lionel Messi, which is the Magic the Gathering card, Force of Will. And specifically, we're here to talk about the art for Force of Will. So we're not going to really dive into the effect or its mechanical history or its history in terms of meta for two reasons. One, I think it's been covered beyond any need for us to cover it. And two, frankly, we're not exactly legacy and vintage experts, Connor. It's fair to say.
I think I can agree with that.
All that to say, we're here to talk about the art. So we're going to start from Therese Nielsen's Alliance's original, and we're going to talk about every single Force of Will art. We're going to talk about the history. We're going to talk about our aesthetic reaction. We're going to try to do some art analysis. And of course, we're going to rate them on a YouTuber S to F scale, which hopefully will you'll either agree or get angry at us. And either way, let us know in the comments.
Yes, and speaking of YouTubers, if you happen to be listening to this episode on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, maybe consider checking this one out and some of our other art episodes over on YouTube, where we put up an image of every card as we talk about, and you can kind of follow along that way. Or, of course, you can look up the cards as you listen to the podcast, whatever works for you.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes for all the arts in chronological order on Scryfall. So either way, make sure to follow along.
All right. Should we get some Force of Will going here?
Let's do it. All right. Well, we're starting off with a bang, with a gout of flame. We're starting off with Therese Nielsen's Alliance's original art for Force of Will. I got to be honest, Connor, whenever a card or piece of art like this comes up on the show, I get a little nervous. I think we are world leaders at covering like 2/2 bears from Kamigawa with no effects. I think very few people cover those in the depth we do. But when we talk about something this big, it's a little intimidating because this card is probably in the top, 5 most iconic pieces of art in the entire game. I can't think of anything that outscores it except maybe the original Black Lotus, maybe Balance, Time Walk, Lightning Bolt. Like, it is a really, really short list of pieces of art that are this famous, that have had this much legacy, and that people I think are as emotionally attached to as this original piece of art from Alliances.
Yeah, I mean, it's just looking at it here, apart from all of that, I agree, pretty intimidating history and kind of mythos to this card and this art. It's just a really powerful piece standing on its own.
Yeah, I totally agree. So before we get into kind of the history and how the composition of this, which we found a lot of really interesting resources on, let's just start with the aesthetics. To me, this art is interesting because it's not exactly my style. I have a Donato Giancola's cartographer print on my wall. I can't quite imagine putting a print on this on my wall, but I still can't help but admire it. On a pure aesthetic level, this image is just overflowing with sort of power and might, whether it's the guy's musculature, whether it's power of his pose, the intensity of it, his angry facial expression, the flames rising up, the really, really strong colors, the way that the red contrasts with the blue of the flame, of the frame, on so many levels, this piece just breathes power. I love it.
I think a print of this would look great on any home or office wall. Preferably a very large print, maybe on velvet.
It is a little bit velvet painting, isn't it?
A little bit. Got that energy.
Yeah, or it's like something you would see in kind of a very small museum or gift shop in Hawaii.
Yes.
Or it's very 90s. It's very like sort of image comic. And I know Therese Nielsen, I think, got her start basically in kind of comic book art. And I feel like you can see some of that here. Actually, when speaking of comic books, like when in Therese Nielsen's blog, and I'll link this, she's got a couple really interesting articles about composition and history of this piece. And she said her inspiration for this was, quote, reptiles, football, Kiss, like the band, and Wolverine. And I love that. And you really see Wolverine here, especially. Like, he literally has Wolverine's claws, for example.
I mean, you can really see all of that in here. There's this kind of scaly mantle that I guess the shaman is wearing. You can definitely see Kiss in here. I guess football and maybe the pose and
just the insane musculature, right? Like,
yeah. And maybe the insane facial expression being made here.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating to me how, and I think this is going to be kind of a theme with a lot of the art in this episode. It's fascinating to me how even though the pose of the subject of this painting is very static and, there's not, on the surface, there's not a lot of movement happening here, it still feels like such a dynamic piece. Like there's just this sense of pent up energy and power just waiting to explode out of this guy.
I agree. Yeah, it's like it really feels like a moment. It's a moment frozen in time, but unlike, and we'll talk about this with some of the other pieces, a lot of these are trying to get across this kind of like idea of like a single frozen moment in a very dynamic scene. But this one, I think, does it. I won't hide the ball. I'll spoil it. I think it does it more effectively than any of the 7 pieces we're going to talk about today. It really gets across this idea of momentum and movement and like struggle. I think like you get the sense that this is hard, which is another difference, I think, with a lot of these later pieces. And so even though this card is like radically inappropriate color scheme wise and mage wise for a blue counterspell, like as far as getting across the idea of force of will, I think this art really sells it. Like this guy is exerting so much force through his will, through an act of will.
Yeah, it's hard to separate our feelings about the art from, the card that we now know it's associated with. But I think as you found in your research, this was originally for a red card, right?
There's a reason that this art doesn't make a ton of sense on this card, which is that this doesn't appear to have been originally intended for a blue spell. So I'm going to read you all the full art brief for this card. This is all Therese Nielsen had. And by the way, this was, she says in her blog, her first ever commissioned piece of art for Magic the Gathering, so no pressure. Her full brief, red card, depict a shaman using fire or red magic. Working title, stop spell. So that's it. Red card, shaman using fire magic, stop spell, which obviously explains why you got this extremely fiery shamanistic flame magic. One of the things that's really weird in there is that last bit, working title, stop spell, which sort of seems to suggest that this was counterspell in red maybe at some point in development. Unfortunately, I can't find any place online where anyone talks about what this originally did. Morrow says that this was always part of the free cycle. And he said that its code name or test name during development was Gorilla Stop Spell. But unfortunately, he's never said what it did, although he does say that he came up with the final name. But we don't really know, like, as far as I can tell, when this changed from being a red card or a blue card, what the effect was originally. I got to say, Connor, if this piece is on a red card, I don't know that it becomes as famous. It's interesting to think if this was on some hypothetical red card, that it is as powerful as force of will, which is essentially impossible to imagine back at this time. But let's just imagine that, I don't know, it was like on a pitch red spell that dealt 5 damage or something. Does this art become as iconic if it's in the right color, if it's equally powerful?
I don't think it does. And I think like this motif of the flames that we see coming up in the later pieces, spoiler alert, like I don't think that sticks around either. In red, this is just a red background and some red flames and fairly like red looking character as far as the pose and the general aesthetic of him. I think it just kind of looks like another, well done red card.
Yeah, like if this is called, I don't know, Balduvian Shaman, there might already be a card called Balduvian Shaman, I'm not sure. And it's like 1RR01 RRR tap, destroy target artifact, or something like that, right? Which is totally imaginable. Probably no one remembers this card, right? Which gets to this weird alchemy in Magic art appreciation where you just can't disentangle these things, right? Like the original Time Walk is an interesting piece of art, probably not as famous a piece of art if it's not on Time Walk, though.
I have an update for you. There is a Balduvian Shaman.
Of Of course there is.
In a huge twist, it is also blue.
No way.
I gotta read
Amazing.
it. I gotta read it to you because
Oh,
this
I
is
remember this card. Oh
an
my god.
insane card. Balduvian Shaman, 1 blue mana for a 1/1 cleric. And I'm gonna read the Oracle text and then I'll read
Oracle or
it
printed,
as it
they're
is
both
printed.
insanity.
Oracle text is tap. Change the text of target white enchantment you control that doesn't have cumulative upkeep by replacing all instances of one color word with another. That enchantment gains cumulative upkeep 1. And then as if that wasn't bad enough, as printed, it says tap, permanently change the text of target white enchantment you control that does not have cumulative upkeep by replacing all instances of one color word with another. For example, you may change counters black spells to counters blue spells. Balduvian Shaman cannot change mana symbols. That enchantment now has cumulative upkeep 1.
Honestly, that printed text is pretty darn good for 1995 for what this card is doing. That's almost identical to the Oracle text. That's incredible.
It's pretty close. I love the for example.
So this is like a circle of protection swapper, basically, in blue?
Yeah, at the cost of cumulative upkeep.
Man.
Wow. I'd also like to just quickly direct the listener or the viewer's attention to the art of Balduvian War Makers. I'll just let people look into that on their own.
All right, I'll put links to both these Balduvians. I just looked at it.
It's so good.
Unbelievable. Oh, that's so much better than I hoped. Oh man. Okay, all right. We've got a little bit of field here. Back to Force of Will. Okay. One other bit of trivia I really liked from Therese Nielsen's blog is that the model for this painting is actually, drumroll, Therese Nielsen. So she didn't have any reference images. This is, back in the early 90s. She can't just hop on the internet and go find something on Google Images. So she had no reference. She had like 1 to 2 days to finish the painting. She didn't have time to hire a model. So she basically stripped down and took a Polaroid of herself. And she's careful to say that she was very fit at the time, which I think is great. She must indeed have been very fit if she was even close to the reference image for this. And she has a little itty bitty crop of this on her site. But she's cropped most of it because I think she says, quote, it was more than I wanted, a bit more than I wanted floating around the internet. So fair enough.
Perfectly fair.
Yeah. She's also got some other fun resources on her blog, like the original sketch for this card, some info about artist proofs, just lots of little fun bits of trivia for anyone who loves this art, which I think is probably a lot of people.
Where does this art fall on the YouTuber S to F scale for you?
I mean, it's an easy S. I can't, again, I'm going to deflate that a little bit by saying I can't disentangle, the fact that this card has always been in my sort of subconscious as a Magic player and the role it's played in the history and blah, 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 blah. And yet, I think if I set all that aside, I think it's still a total banger. So this is an easy S.
Yeah, I don't think I can really separate the art from the card and the story here. So it's definitely an S for me. I think on its own, if this was just a Balduvian Shaman, I think it'd still be right in the A range. Okay, so moving on from the original Force of Will and Alliances, fast forwarding all the way to 2011, we have Force of Will by Matt Stewart. I gotta be honest, my very first reaction to this art was that it feels like something you would find in the back of a 4th edition D&D Player's Handbook, as just like maybe a depiction of a wizard casting or deflecting.
I know exactly what you mean, though.
Yeah, it's just, generically fantasy. It's certainly technically skillful, and to me, just totally uninteresting.
I got to be honest. I wish I could provide an interesting contrast on this one, but I'm kind of right there with you. The word I have in my notes is kind of workman-like. Like, I think this piece is very sort of solid, right? Like the light sources are all there. Like on a technical level, it's quite well executed. It's done in oil, which I think is cool. Like it's totally solid. And I think it's got a tough task coming 15 years after 15 years. The only art for the most powerful counterspell Magic is that original Therese Nielsen piece. And then, so I think anyone coming along has a tough act to follow. I gotta say, even ignoring that though, I think this one is like, it's sort of fine. But one of the ways I think it suffers by comparison with the original is the original feels so idiosyncratic. It feels so specific to Therese Nielsen as an artist. It feels so stylistically distinct. It feels so like uninhibited. And this feels very kind of standard issue fantasy. I could picture this on any number of cards in any number of games for a
Yep.
good decade. Like it's just nothing to kind of distinguish it really for me.
Yeah, I think that's why like it called to mind like the D&D player's handbook for me is just like this is, an image of fantasy that you could really drop into any number of scenarios and it would be fine in all of them, but also unmemorable in all of them.
Right. It's like in 4E. Like we need a piece of art on this page because it's been 5 pages or whatever
Yeah.
since we had a big splashy piece of art.
Yep.
I will say Matt has a nice little blog post. It's not as detailed as Therese Nielsen's, but he's got a brief blog that shows some like sketches and some development. So if you are a fan of this piece, I'll link that. That's worth looking up. One thing I noticed about this piece is it's a bit of a departure from what I typically see from Matt Stewart, like looking at the rest of his pieces on Scryfall. A lot of his best pieces are really, they're almost portraits. Like Waste Not is a great example. The new Delver of Secrets, where he looks just totally deranged, holding a jar up in the air. Once Upon a Time, like I think a lot of his pieces are, I guess, comparatively still. He doesn't really do action from what I can tell. Almost all of his pieces are pretty static, not in a bad way. And I think like this shows maybe where his comparative strengths are. Because like it's all very well rendered. It just doesn't have, one of the things that's missing from it to me is the sense of dynamism. Like there's this tremendous gout of flame, but I don't really have a sense of like danger or tension in here particularly.
Yeah, it looks like the flames are just sort of like sting away, if that's a verb.
Yeah, I know what you mean. They're just gotta.
There's no real gland clash. There's no
gland clash. I hope not.
I love that band. There's no grand clash of magical energies here. It's just kind of this jet of flame just sort of dissipates, just puffs away. So I think for me, all of that adds up to a C.
Solid C for me as well. All right, jumping forward just a couple more years to Eternal Masters, we have a piece by little-known artist Therese Nielsen, again. So Therese Nielsen is given the tough act of following up on her original. This, I think, is an incredible piece. It's not quite there for me with the original Force of Will. I think it's a little more constrained artistically. It feels more art directed, and I'll get back to that point in a second once you've weighed in. And yet I really like it. I love the composition here. I love how dark and moody and intense it is, and I like the like super high highlights on the flames in the bottom corner, contrasting with the almost like the figure almost retreats for a second. You almost have to peer into it to notice that the figure's there. So I think there's a lot I really love about it, and I think it's only that I'm comparing it to the original that I have any critique.
I really love this one. I feel that maybe this is the point of tension between us. I feel like this is sort of a perfect follow-up and callback to the original Force of Will. It's it's not at that same level of iconicness, but it has a lot of the same motifs in what I imagine has to be an intentional way on Therese Nielsen's part. There's a sort of a similar flowing or almost floating black hair, this really cool headdress, pretty distinct musculature, not as distinct as the original, but pretty distinct muscles here. That,
she's still pretty darn ripped.
Yeah. And, they suggest that this mage is not just spending all her time at the library. I like all of those callbacks, and I think that they also independently add up to a really great piece, especially mostly because of the sort of magical energy situation that's happening around her. There's still the flames like in the original Force of Will that are kind of rendered in, they definitely read as flames, but there hasn't been an attempt to make them, hyper realistic, which of course is a very difficult thing to do when you're painting fire. And it's clashing with this sort of watery magic that is an expression of her Force of Will. And just the whole composition of it, the colors, the lighting, the figure, all of it just really works for me.
Mm-hmm. I love the rendering on the water. It's this almost kind of like donut of water magic around her, and the
water donut.
The water donut. And I love
it's
the way
an inner
the
tube.
Flames get kind of tugged along by the water donut, and they're sort of being subsumed, and sort of like on the left they're very forceful, right, where they first meet it, and then on the right you can almost hear them like sputtering out, like struggling to escape, right? You see that, how they're sort of like popping, little sparks are flying out of the water. It's just really beautifully rendered, and it's a fun bit of storytelling, Like again, in this, I think that's part of what's gives the sense of motion here is that it's almost comic book. Like you can almost read this left to right as a story, not in any big way, right? But you have that sense of motion and progression in the piece. You can see kind of where something's beginning and where it's ending.
Yeah, and I think it has that kind of clash of magical power that we just didn't see in the Matt Stewart piece, right? That like half the story was missing there.
Yeah, or even frankly in the original piece, right? The original piece is sort of like she's pointing a flamethrower at somebody. Whereas this one, yeah, you get that clash idea, and you get this sense of like indomitable power from her, right? Like it's clearly a clash. There's clearly something strong, a strong assault being mounted against her, and yet she's like indomitable, which is cool.
Yeah, she's unfazed.
So I alluded to the art direction, and I really want to read the full art description for this because I think it's fascinating. And before I do that, let me go back and reread the one for the Alliance's original Force of Will, just to refresh you. So the original art description for Alliance's: red card, depict a shaman using fire or red magic, working title, stop spell. That's it. Okay, here's the art description for this Eternal Masters follow-up. Setting, not setting specific. Color, blue spell. Location, your choice. Intention, this spell prevents another spell from taking place. Action, a female human mage, I would like this to be a black woman, please, stands with her front toward us, this is probably from the waist up, with her hands overlapped, palms toward us, and fingers fully extended and tense defensively in front of her chest. Think of an open hand CPR. Her chin is slightly upturned as if looking over the camera. Her face is almost expressionless with concentration. Her wide eyes glow a bright blue, and bright blue sparks of overflowing energy are rushing out of them. A huge wave of fire splits around her and disperses as if it's hitting an invisible shield, leaving her unharmed. Maybe it turns into smoke on either side of her. Focus, the scene of superhuman concentration and power. Mood, nothing in this world or the next is stronger than my will. Notes, please make this iconic.
Whew.
So I find that contrast in art descriptions really interesting. It shows like how much, I guess, Wizards as a company has matured, right? How much they've moved from this kind of like wildcat operation early on, just like basically trying to put out sets and not break anything, or, you know, not have anything blow up, into like this machine where there's people whose job it is to sit and think about every piece of art and what the composition is and what story it's trying to tell and da-da-da-da-da-da. I think it's interesting also that within all those constraints, you still have this piece that's tremendously individual, right? It still feels super Therese Nielsen, even with this really pretty prescriptive brief, which I think is a bit of a feat.
Yeah, I think she like hits the brief perfectly, but also just gives it such a distinct energy that I think is lacking from some of the other pieces we're going to look at.
Also, I'll link this blog post as well. One of the things I think is fun is she's got a couple of her early sketches, and she talks about how WotC reacted. And there's two things WotC said. Like, one, you must center her in the frame, because her original sketch, she was slightly off center, which actually I think looks a little better, frankly. There's a version of a sketch in here where she's kind of like 3/5 on the frame, which I think is actually a better pose. And then they insisted on the wide-eyed look, overflowing with energy. So she submitted a sketch where she has basically normalized, and they're like, nope, must be glowing with blue energy.
Magic. So what's your rating for this Therese Nielsen follow-up?
I'm right on the fence between A and S, so I really like it. I don't know why I'm holding back. I feel like I want to make S better. All right, I'm S. Damn it. I have A in my notes, but I think I'm an S.
All right. This is an easy S for me. I think it like independently absolutely stands on its own, and in relation to the original Force of Will feels like perfect follow-up 20 years later. Okay, our next one is Force of Will, I guess the Invocation printing from Amonkhet. This depicts the God Eternal Kefnet. It's a really cool piece, but it's also a very monochromatic one. It's just kind of beige all the way through, which, on its own is, I guess, not necessarily an issue, but doesn't really read as Force of Will when you first look at it.
Yeah, it feels hypocritical to critique this card for what I'm about to say when we love the original Force of Will for similar reasons. But this card doesn't feel a lot like a blue counterspell to me. It feels like a sort of white... Oh, and I don't think we said the artist name. This is James Jones, by the way, on this one. It feels like a I don't know, like a mass disenchant effect or something. Like I just don't have that feel of kind of like warring energy that I associate with counterspells. And as you said, the fact that it's all like yellow and white tones, I think kind of gets in the way of it feeling like Force of Will as well.
Yeah, definitely doesn't feel like a blue card. Maybe that's just kind of my lizard brain not seeing any blue in the painting and thinking that it's a white card.
Yeah, wear blue. More
Yeah.
blue. Well, it doesn't help that the invocation frames themselves, right, are like super bleached out, right? You just got these faint
Yeah.
strips of blue, but like the
Also
mana
beige.
symbols are monochromatic. Yeah.
Yep. Something I think Jamie Jones absolutely nails, though, and what seems to be kind of his specialty is the sense of scale here.
Yes.
So this is a card depicting Kefnet, who's supposed to be like a great god in the plane of Amonkhet, and this is like basically the only card I could find from some very limited bare bones research I did depicting Kefnet that actually gives a sense that this is a god and not just kind of like a bird-headed guy. Like there is a real feeling of scale and majesty here with the buildings and the palm trees and these mountains around, just all kind of leading up to this huge figure looming over everything.
Yeah, there's a real sense of awe. And I think you're right. Like the way that those foreground elements like build on each other, getting kind of like first you have the trees, which trees are already pretty tall. Then you have these big buildings. Then you have these mountains. And by the end, you're like, is he like 1,000 feet tall? It's actually like the scent. And I think it's also the way you're looking up at him. Like he's kind of foreshortened in this way that also gives you this feeling of tremendous height. I will say, I don't know if canonically the Amonkhet gods can vary in size or what, but like Kefnet is wildly different sizes in different pieces of art, and it drives me a little bit bananas. So, for example, in Lay Claim, where Kefnet is grabbing a dragon with the biggest hand on any piece of Magic card art, I think he again appears to be like 1,400 feet tall. Like I don't even know. He's absolutely titanic.
I mean, that one doesn't even like read to me at that the bird head in the distant background is even connected to
This is what I've always wondered. Is it meant to be a magical hand? I don't know. Maybe it is a magical hand controlling the Drake. But on the other hand, if you look at, say, Tragic Lesson, poor dead Kefnet, where he's standing with some people, and the people look to be basically like 2/3 of his height. Like he looks like he's about 10 feet tall. Spell Pierce, the Invocation edition, it's kind of hard to tell the scale, but again, the sense is not very large. It's like, I don't know, maybe 10 or 20 feet tall. So this really bothers me. I really have no idea how big the gods are meant to be. Or maybe I'm being too hard. Maybe he's big everywhere and it's just Tragic Lesson where he's inexplicably tiny.
That's the lesson.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like as a piece, so if I try to ignore that this is Force of Will and ignore the monochromatic thing, like I like this. I think even if it wasn't for my slight Force of Will reservations, I wouldn't be sort of jumping out of my seat with this one and going like, oh my goodness. I think it's very competent. I really like the sense of scale. I like the sense of motion in the wind and in his robes, but it doesn't excite me particularly.
Yeah, it's cool. I think Jamie Jones has some truly badass pieces like Progenitus, Emrakul the Promised End, Zakama. Like he's got some really good stuff out there. And I think against those, this Force of Will is just kind of hanging out.
Yeah, he's a great monster doer. Like I love Progenitus in particular, and also Earl the Miststalker from what is that from? Alara Reborn. I think that's like such a cool, moody piece.
Yeah, big stuff from Jamie Jones. So I've got this at a C. I like it, but it feels like a mismatch for Force of Will, and I don't think it's all that memorable.
Yeah, this is a D for me. It's not an F. Like I think it's very competent, but I don't have any emotion around it at all. It's just like it's there.
Yeah.
By the way, before we get to this next one, thank you for giving me all the kind of really iconic ones to introduce here.
Yeah, no problem.
Next, I'm going to Scott M. Fischer's Double Masters, possible masterpiece. This is a really interesting piece. Before I get into the kind of merits of the piece, I'm going to link in the show notes an incredible video from Scott M. Fischer about how this was painted. It's only like 10 minutes long. If you're the kind of person who's nerdy enough about magic art that you've listened to us yammer on for this long, go check out this video. It's really cool. He goes into a lot of depth. Some of the really interesting things he shares in there are just kind of his process for working in acrylic here. He starts with a bunch of sketches, obviously. Then he kind of finalizes a sketch and he does this really interesting value study that he shows off where he kind of is playing with the colors and color balance and settles on this basic kind of blue, green, red, dark red color scheme. And then he actually does most of the piece in like acrylic dip pen with this pretty visible sketch. And it's hard to tell looking at the final piece until you watch him build it up and you realize, oh, like part of what makes this piece so kind of like pop so much, it makes it so kind of contrasty and makes the figure in particular so finely realized, is that he's actually got the sketch is still kind of visible underneath all the color washing that he's doing, which is cool. And then finally he builds these big, messy, organic washes of color with pretty wet acrylic on top. So really cool piece. Really cool to see it come to life. I gotta say, I admire this on an aesthetic level. There's details in it, like the water, that I really love. The overall effect, I'm not a huge fan of. I find it a bit static. I don't like her kind of overlong, kind of like Hearthstone character body. Like it's actually very Barbie like actually body. Like it's too unreal for me. And also I think mostly it's got this problem that we had with Matt Stewart, but even more so of like, this looks like it's supposed to be full of motion. And yet I just don't get any sense of dynamism from the figure in particular. A little more from the elemental parts, but the figure to me feels like frozen almost, like she's not going to move.
Yeah, I think it doesn't help that she's basically in like a straight line from the top of her head to like all the way down one of her legs. It's just a straight line all the way through there, which I think really like kills a lot of the sense of motion that should be happening in a piece where like there's a lot going on. And it seems like there should be a lot of dynamism happening.
Yeah, I think that straight line inside is a really good one. I'm actually holding a Graxaplon up to my screen to sort of measure her body angle here, and it.
Using the Graxaplon or the edge of the card?
I'm using the edge of the Graxaplon. You could do this with any Magic card, but if people have a Graxaplon, I'd say go dig that out for this exercise.
You have the option, yeah.
But anyway, like her body is literally a straight line, like from the tip of her head all the way to the bottom of her kind of occluded rear leg. It's completely straight. I think it helps with this sort of sense of force of will, right? This like sense of power and control. Like she's obviously very controlled, but it loses any, especially because she's like meant to be sort of hanging off a ship's mast, which doesn't seem like something you could do while doing basically a plank. But like it just doesn't quite work for me on a sort of anatomical level.
Yeah. By the way, Occluded Rear Leg is my favorite Gland Clash album.
Excellent.
So I have pretty mixed feelings about this piece. Kind of the more I look at it, the more bothered I am in a way. I think just because the pose, the lack of motion in the pose is so kind of distracting. But the rest of the piece, that like all the elemental magical stuff that's happening around the mage, that's, you know, taking up the center of the frame, is really, really cool looking. Like there are these huge, very comic book fireballs raining down from sort of the upper right hand corner. These big swoops of watery magic, that both of these very stylized, that are clashing with and interacting with each other in a really dynamic way. The lighting is really cool to see, the way that the flames,
the lighting is on point.
The way that her hand is kind of lighting up the water behind her, and then this fireball that's hitting the sort of wave of water is lighting everything up. It's really cool. And the flames rippling out across the water. Like I love all of that. And then you kind of get to the mage at the center and this awkward pose and the way that she's grabbing this like mast and rigging that seems really like disproportionate to her size. Like it kind of makes it look like she's about 30 feet tall. Mm-hmm. Kind of a Kefnet problem here.
Should we start calling that the Kefnet problem from now on?
I think we should.
I'm glad you called out her glowing hand, actually, because he talks a little bit and he shows in his video that was basically spontaneous. He didn't intend to sort of have the hand glow like that. And then as he sort of first started washing it in white, he was like, this is weird, but I like it. I like it too. It's this sort of inexplicable detail that adds some texture, right? Like when you're designing a good D&D dungeon or adventure, I think it's really important to have stuff that isn't fully explained, to leave stuff. Tolkien, for example, is great at this, right? Like when you read Lord of the Rings, he's mentioning all these names and places and historical events, and you sort of like, you're catching a glimpse of them as though they're a fast moving vehicle, right? Like you're whipping your head around trying to see it and it's gone. And sort of here, again, it's like this sort of detail. Like, is it significant that her hand's glowing? Is that like an error? Is that like her power is in coming through the mast in some way? I don't know what it means, if anything, but it sort of hooks you in and adds a little bit of uncertainty, I guess.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
Her armor also is just like beautifully rendered, like the lighting on her armor and the kind of different textures he's able to draw out. The way you see cloth and metal here, it really reads instantly as all these different types of materials. Pretty cool.
Yep, yep. So what does that all add up to? I want you to rate first because I have one thing written down and I can't decide if I'm going to stick with it or not.
Okay. Well, first we should disagree. I think we've been entirely on the too much on the same page this episode.
Okay, I'll make sure to pick something else then.
Whatever floats your boat. I would give it a B. Like, I think it's a B for me. I think for plenty of people, this is an S. I can totally understand why. For me, the sort of technical stuff and the fact that it's just not my style of art, it makes it a B, basically. But it's a great piece.
Yeah, so I have A written down. I'm just gonna say A minus. We don't usually do pluses or minuses here, but it's like it's an A with reservations. Okay, I think I finally got one that we are both at least a little bit happy with. This is Force of Will by Donato Giancola for Dominaria Remastered, I believe. So very recent piece. So this feels kind of weird to say right after I was praising all of the elemental chaos happening in Scott M. Fischer's Force of Will. But I feel like there's just kind of one too many elements in the art here. We've got the sort of signature Force of Will jet of flame in the top right corner. We have a like cloud of darkness on top of the sort of protective sphere around the mage, who may or may not be Teferi. There's this black lightning bolt coming from the left side, and then a bunch of black goo coming up from the bottom left corner. And it's just there's too much happening to this poor mage to make me really believe in any of it.
I can't totally argue with that. I do think it's a little goofy. I really like this piece though. So it's not the sort of immediately iconic kind of like grab you by the throat image that like Scott M. Fischer or either of the Therese Nielsen pieces are. But I find it just very accomplished. In particular, I really like the figure here. The figure to me has a kind of simultaneous strength and fragility, which I think is something I find missing a little bit in some of these other pieces. Like I think a lot of the other pieces, they lean into the sort of power of the mage, right? This sort of like, I can deflect anything. This is easy for me, right? Like Scott M. Fischer's epitomizes this. Like there's no effort in that piece. She's just easily tossing away this opposing magic, which is fine. But this piece, I feel like he's struggling, right? He's the hero at the end of a Marvel movie when all the other heroes have fallen or given up, and he's just holding on through nothing but his force of will to his project, right? And I really like the way that comes through just in the sort of really quite, for Giancola, like Giancola has this interesting thing where he spans from like extreme realism, like in Cartographer, to kind of comic booky and cards like Flame Wave or Rank and File, kind of Seb McKinnon fairy tale style, and like Oculus Whelp or his Forest Dryad token. He's got a lot of range. Here he's very kind of impressionistic, right? We can barely see the figure. He's sort of sketchy and almost fuzzy around the edges, and yet that emotion and that kind of sense of fragility for me really comes through, and I really like that.
I like that also. I don't really get the end of a Marvel movie sense that you get from this piece.
What?
I think it's
Sorry
just
for blowing out the mic.
it's just part of it is sort of the goofiness, like we said, of the apparently like 4 different kinds of attacks coming at him, 3 of which are various like versions of darkness. But then it's also this very tranquil background behind him, right? Like there's just kind of a row of pillars and maybe some shallow water it looks like he might be standing in. The peacefulness of that background and sort of the goofiness of these attacks just doesn't give me the sense that he's under that much peril, right? Like I get the sense of fragility and I like that aspect of it. I really like the actual central subject of this piece, kind of the opposite of the one that we just looked at. But kind of everything around him is not working for me.
Let me think about this. So one thing that I find a little confused is I can't quite make sense of the perspective, right? Like the sphere that's being attacked by basically a space laser.
Yeah.
It kind of looks to me to be significantly behind him, but then he also seems to be encircled by it. That part I find kind of confused. I don't quite know what to do with that. Is that like a previous sphere of protection that he just sort of left behind. I can't quite tell. And I'll also admit I find the black lightning bolt just kind of goofy.
Yeah, it's like that. Why is that there?
It's pure darkness. I don't know that he's under assault from.
We already have other darkness.
But I like the way I do like the ripple. I find the ripples around that black lightning bolt like amazing. I could just look at those all day. I think they're really, really cool. I love the way they kind of lightly refract the background. And I love the black goo that's kind of coming up around him. It's very Miyazaki goo that's sort of welling up, threatening to drown him.
All right, I'll say this. I think I would really like this piece if it was just the black goo on both sides. And just sort of this encroaching Miyazaki darkness.
Oh, with no laser. Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, take the laser out, take the lightning bolt out, take the smoke out on top, like just have the black goo creeping up. And I think that this would be a much spookier, more successful piece.
That's interesting. I can see that. Well, because I think one of the things here is it's like, what is he being assaulted by? Like,
yeah,
it's like 4 different spells, which, by the way, Force of Will only has 1 target. So maybe that's confusing. Interesting. I can see that. I think those are fair critiques, Connor. I'm gonna render judgment that those are fair critiques.
Okay, please note that for the record.
All right, it's in the book.
So I don't know. I really like the central figure in all of this, and I would give him alone an A or an S. But I think with everything else going on here, it comes down to about a C for me.
Oof. I can't follow you down. I'm still an A, even accepting all the critiques. I just enjoy this one at a visceral level. I think it's great.
Fair enough.
All right, let's close this thing out with another Dominaria remastered piece. This one by another all-time great Magic artist, Richard Kane Ferguson. Okay, this is a dangerous thing to say, Connor. It might even be a heretical thing to say on a Magic History podcast, but I've never really liked Richard Kane Ferguson's art much. So I'm just going to put that out there. I'm going to try to set it aside. I hope what?
Okay.
What? You can't follow me on that one.
I mean, I really like some of his stuff. This is not one of them, but well, go on.
But I'll just set all that aside. This piece, I think the biggest problem I have with this piece is I can't take it seriously. It is so serious feeling, right? It's so portentous. It's like William Blake, the artist who did Ancient of Days and all this other kind of late 18th century apocalyptic kind of Christian inspired, but not Christian mythological imagery, all this totally crazy stuff. It's very William Blakey, but it's also very like He-Man in a way that for me, it's like, it's trying to be William Blake, but it ends up being He-Man for me. And I can't take He-Man seriously. And I just can't take this seriously. There's so much sort of portentous stuff between like the halo behind him, that's the rising sun, and his like vestments, like a ancient Abrahamic priest or Mosaic priest, and the book exploding with light. It's just too much for me. It's too much.
It's kind of like He-Man and the Book of Revelation.
Yes, absolutely. And Genesis all rolled together.
yes. Yeah, this one does not click for me at all. I think what really kills it for me, like I could imagine a Force of Will that looks like He-Man in the Book of Revelation that does work in some strange way. This one, I think because the wizard is just like the world's dorkiest looking wizard, I just can't deal with it. His abdomen is literally an upside down triangle. Like Superman. Like if you were to measure the angles of...
Hold on, let me grab my Graxaplon.
Yes, please grab the Graxaplon, measure the angles of each point of this triangle, and I think you'll find that every angle is identical.
You know what? It's actually a perfect hourglass like the one in the clock spinning logo.
That's beautiful.
It's the same triangle. Like his legs are also the exact same triangle. Like it's so... Yeah, it's so formal in that aspect that again,
he's got like, the hourglass figure.
He does.
So that abdomen then is inside. It inhabits a trapezoid formed by this robe that's billowing out from his magical book, and then on top of all of that, we have basically a square head. So this like assembly,
it's kind of a mullet, actually.
Yeah, a little bit, sort of a simian mullet. So this like assembly of basic shapes just does not read powerful wizard to me. It reads like big dork.
It also doesn't, and I know I'm hypocritical on this, but it doesn't read like Force of Will or like a counterspell. If this was on like Wrath of God or
Yeah.
Armageddon or Balance, this would be a great balance art, I think. Nothing in this feels like, I guess the book being dissolved could be counter magic, maybe. I just can't, or a disenchant. It feels like any number of effects, most of them white.
Other than just sort of the idea of raw force happening in this piece, there, like nothing about it reads as a counterspell, right? It's just kind of magical power exploding out of this wizard or the book or the background. Like you can't tell. None of it looks like a counterspell.
For all my saying I don't really like Richard Kane Ferguson that much, I don't think my problem with this, the more I talk about it, is really as a piece. It just doesn't really support the narrative of the card. And I think I'm willing to let Therese Nielsen off the hook for that because of, in a way, I'm just not here.
I think it's very different creating the first iteration of a card and then creating the, I guess, seventh iteration of the card with coming up on 3 decades of history behind it, like one of the most iconic cards in the game.
You know, one thing I'll give this props for, no gout of giant red flame.
Yeah, it's got everything else. Doesn't have that, though.
One other thing, before we get to ratings or anything else, we haven't talked about flavor text on any of these cards because this is an art review. I have to say, I think all of the flavor texts for Force of Will are pretty lousy, but this one might be the worst, particularly in terms of how well it fits the art. So the flavor text on this is, weren't you ever taught that it's rude to interrupt? Which is, you know, a classic Blue Mage one-liner, I guess. But like that is not the energy of this guy. Like this guy's energy is like, silence mortal or something, you know, like it's not, he's not like a catty teacher in a class.
Yeah, it should be like a quote from scripture or something.
Oh, you know what, this would have been a great, you know, they used to put quotes from classic literature and Shakespeare and the Bible and stuff. This would be a great card to put a quote from like Samuel Taylor Coleridge or Lord Byron or the Book of Genesis in the King James version
or the Book of Revelation.
Wouldn't that have been great? There's got to be something they could have put on here that would have like leaned into the mythicness of this in a great way. Come on, Watsy, like would be the perfect card for it.
Yeah. I have always really despised this kind of like snarky counterspell flavor text.
Me too. I feel like maybe
it's just so over cute and tight. Like they just all feel like, you know, the worst kinds of lines from a not very good anime or something.
Yeah, they're like something you would say in the heat of a D&D session and it would feel kind of cool in the moment. Or something like I just find them sort of cringy, I guess. I guess I'm joyless. I'm going to go read the others real quick. So on Eternal Masters, that second Therese Nielsen piece, it is, I alone determine my destiny. Fine, I guess. Then the Double Masters Scott M. Fischer piece is amateur. I don't know how to read it. Just amateur in quotes. And then the Giancola piece, also from Dominaria Remastered, your artillery will burn itself out before I allow my focus to waver. Which I think I like that one best because it at least creates a little bit of a story. It's like artillery, huh? Like my brain hooks on that. There's something to work with. These other ones to me are just like, just rotten.
Well, you forgot the Matt Stewart one, which is 2011 Legacy Championship winner. I think that's the best one.
It actually is the best one. Yeah, we didn't talk about the fact that this was like a prize card for the 2011 Legacy Championship, which is cool. Okay, I think we didn't rate this. What's your rating on this, Connor?
No, we got a little distracted. This one's a D for me. It's a D for dorky.
I'm gonna follow you on D for dorky. Perfect.
All right.
Well, Connor, I think after all that, I can feel my force of will beginning to waver.
Oh, come on.
Connor, weren't you ever taught that it's rude to interrupt? Okay. You can follow the show on YouTube or subscribe in your favorite podcast app. If you enjoyed it, you've been on YouTube, you know, like, subscribe, share it with a friend, comment, all that good stuff. It genuinely helps us out. We're chasing 100 subscribers. And I think within, I don't know, what do you reckon, Connor? 2 to 3 more years, we can get there.
I think we're almost there.
Also, if you have any thoughts or feedback, shoot us a comment. You can email us clockspinningpodcast@gmail.com. We really genuinely enjoy hearing memories, thoughts on what we said, ideas for upcoming episodes. Nothing's too weird. We did a whole episode on Graxapon, so share it. It's all good. And incidentally, if you are a super fan of the show or of Kamigawa, I encourage you to hang around after the outro music because we have a little bit of Kamigawa bonus content for you. We'll be back next episode with, I don't know, maybe we'll finally finish our Betrayers Kamigawa review. We'll see. But until then, I'm Austin.
And I'm Connor.
Thanks for listening. Okay, Connor. So next up, I know you're kind of sleepy. We switched to back to night recording, and we're kind of both barely coping. So I have found on funtrivia.com a cognitive test for you. Does that work for you? Are you willing to accept funtrivia.com?
Yeah, it's one of the most trusted websites out there.
Well, yeah, and this one is by Suncrusher16, so you know it's good.
Okay.
All right. So it's a 9-part series. Are you ready? And we'll say 6 or more, 5 or more. If you get a majority right, then you pass. Okay?
Oh, okay. Do I get anything? Dignity.
I'll send you a foil Graxaplan. How about that?
Okay. I'll take that.
I'm up to like 68, so I think I could spare one.
All right. I accept.
All right. Question 1. You ready?
Yep. Hit me.
As explained in 8.5 Tails, why do some kitsune have several tails? A, it's a sign of age. B, they receive an extra tail when they complete an extraordinary deed. C, they are obtained through a rite of passage ceremony. Or D, they are purely for fashion.
I'm going to go with B.
Okay, let's see. Correct.
Oh, yes.
Man, okay. Question 2. Told in Whispers relates to the accidental summoning of which beast?
What?
Kuro Pitlord, A. B. Ayumi the Last Visitor. C. O Kagachi. Or D. The Unspeakable.
That's got to be the Unspeakable.
Correct. That's almost a freebie, actually. You're doing pretty good. All right. Question 3. Which of these rat folk was raised by an ogre in the Servitude of Demons? A. Maronar. B. Ink Eyes. C. Forked Tongue. Or D. Leadfoot.
Ink Eyes, Servant of Oni.
I know, right? It's right there.
Right in the name. There's no Leadfoot.
This is a pretty good quiz. If you're listening, Suncrusher16, props. Okay. Who is Izuka the Ruthless? A backstabbing traitor. That's traitor with a D. B, one of Konda's generals. C, a renegade samurai. Or D, a high-ranking bandit.
Oh, it's C or D. I think it's C.
C, a renegade samurai for Izuka the Ruthless?
Yeah.
Okay. Correct again.
Yes.
Holy cow. I just realized Suncrusher16 actually added fun facts for each question.
Wow.
I'll start reading with this question. Fun facts. Izuka is a masterless Ronin who has no qualms about killing his only son because, quote, I can always have more children, unquote.
Wow. I feel like you got to lose your Bushido privileges for that kind of talk.
That's bad. Okay. Question 5. Kenshi is whose first name? A, Sakashima. B, Takeno. C, Umezawa. Or D, Konda.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Kenshi is whose first name?
And the options?
A, Sakashima. B, Takeno. C, Umezawa. Or D, Konda.
Is it Takeno? B?
B, Takeno. Is that your final answer?
Well, now you make me feel like it shouldn't be, but yes.
I literally have no idea, so don't read into my prompting. It is Sakashima.
Didn't even know Sakashima had a first name.
Me neither. Fun fact, Kenshi is the first name of legendary Sakashima the Imposter, Master of Disguise. After Konda leaves his tower, Sakashima sneaks in to find documents pertaining to his birth. Okay, all right, so you have not yet passed. That's 4 yet correct and 1 failing, so it's still up in the air, listeners.
Okay.
Question 6. Hisoka, headmaster of Minamo, was particularly gifted in which area of blue magic from an early age? A, control magic. or control magic, as the quiz has it. B, illusions. C, counter magic. Or D, flight.
Illusions?
All right.
What?
Counter magic.
Counter magic. That's so boring, Hisoka.
Yeah, well, I mean, it fits the bill, right? Fun facts. As a young student at Minamo, Iki Hisoka was discovered to have a unique talent. For each magic, he found an equal magic to negate it. That is boo.
Ooh. That does sound like a direct quote from one of the novels, though. One of which I read.
Okay. All right, so that's 4 correct and 2 failures. Still all to play for. Which of these characters is not a member of the Hyozan Reckoners? A,
What?
Toshiro Umezawa. B, Iwamori of the Open Fist. C, Hiretsugu. Or D, Kiku Knight's Flower.
Iwamori.
That feels like a freebie. Let's see. Correct. All right, you've passed the cognitive assessment.
Whew.
All right, I'll give you a fun fact, and then do you want to keep going with the last 2 questions?
I think I just got to take the dub and move on with my life.
Just gonna take the dub. All right, fine. No one will find out the last 2. Let me close with a fun fact then. Fun facts. Toshi and Hiretsugu started the Hyozan Reckoner Oath, and Kiku was later incorporated into it. While Iwamori, as all of our listeners, I think, must know, Iwamori is a fighting monk from the forest of Jukai.
News you can use.
I think I've cleared you to record here. Should we go back and start the actual topic of the episode?
I think we should. I'm ready. I've proven it.
All right.